In the harsh winter of 1885, a desperate young mother with a newborn baby collapses on a widower's doorstep, bringing unexpected hope to a man who had lost everything. Will his act of mercy become the salvation they both desperately need? Snow fell like silent judgment from a steel-gray sky as Abigail Morgan stumbled forward, each breath burning in her lungs. 3 days since she'd eaten more than a handful of stale crackers. 3 days since she'd fled Clearwater with her newborn daughter bundled against her chest and the town's whispers chasing at her heels. "Just a little further, Clara," she whispered to the infant who had grown frighteningly quiet. "Mama will find us shelter soon." The mountain path narrowed as darkness crept in, swallowing the distant pines. Wind cut through Abigail's worn coat like it wasn't there at all. Her milk was drying up. She could feel it, and fear clutched her heart tighter than she held her child. Ahead, a flicker of golden light pierced the gathering gloom. A window, a cabin, hope. Abigail forced her frozen feet to move faster, even as black spots danced across her vision. The snow deepened, swallowing her legs to the knees with each desperate step. Her world narrowed to that distant light, salvation just beyond reach. 20 more steps. 10 more. 5. The cabin's rough-hewn porch appeared before her like a mirage. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, carrying the promise of warmth. Abigail reached for the door, her numb fingers barely able to form a fist to knock. But no knock came. Instead, her knees buckled. The world tilted sharply. As consciousness slipped away, Abigail curled her body around Clara, using the last of her strength to keep her baby from the snow as they collapsed against the stranger's door. Inside the cabin, James Harrington paused mid-step, head cocked toward the strange thud that had rattled his door. 2 years alone on this mountain had sharpened his senses. That wasn't the wind. That was something or someone on his porch. His hand moved automatically to the rifle propped beside the fireplace. Raiders weren't common this far up the mountain, but winter made desperate men do desperate things. James hadn't survived 2 years alone by being careless. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting long shadows as he approached the door. No voices outside. No footsteps crunching through snow. Just an eerie silence that raised the hair on his neck. James drew a deep breath, tightened his grip on the rifle, and yanked the door open. No raiders. No trap. Just a young woman face down in the snow, clutching something small wrapped in blankets. "Dear God," he muttered, quickly setting the rifle aside. He knelt, gently turning her over, and his breath caught. Her face was young, too young for the lines of hardship etched around her closed eyes. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint that meant death wasn't far behind. Then the bundle in her arms moved, and a tiny, weak cry rose from the blankets. James's heart hammered against his ribs. A baby. This woman had brought a baby to his doorstep in the dead of winter. "Hey, miss." He tapped her cheek, but she didn't stir. Decision made, he scooped both mother and child into his arms and carried them inside, kicking the door shut behind him. The woman weighed almost nothing, skin and bones beneath sodden clothes. James laid her on the bearskin rug before the fire, then carefully unwrapped the infant from her frozen grip. A little girl, red-faced and hungry, blinked up at him with unfocused eyes. "Well now," he whispered, his voice rusty from disuse. "What am I supposed to do with you?" The baby's only answer was another weak cry. James laid her beside her mother, then hurried to add logs to the fire. Next, he pulled his only spare blankets from the trunk at the foot of his bed, covering the woman before gently scooping up the infant again. "Your mama needs rest," he told the baby awkwardly. "Let's get you warm." He settled into his chair, cradling the tiny bundle against his chest like the precious cargo she was. Strange how it all came back, the way to hold a baby, how to rock gently back and forth. His hands remembered what his heart had tried to forget. "My Eliza," he murmured to the crackling fire, "would say you two were sent here for a reason." But James wasn't sure he believed in reasons anymore. Not since he'd dug 2 graves behind the cabin, one large, one unbearably small. Not since he'd chosen this mountain precisely because nobody would find him here. Yet here they were. A mother. A child. Trouble for certain. The baby quieted against his chest, lulled by his warmth and the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song, rattling the windows in their frames as if demanding entry. James studied the woman's face in the firelight. Pretty, despite exhaustion's heavy hand. Young, perhaps 20 at most. No ring on her finger, he noticed, and fleeing something to be out in such weather with an infant. "What are you running from?" he asked her unconscious form. "And what happens when it catches up?" The questions hung in the air, unanswered. James knew he should ride for the doctor in Pinetree Junction come first light, but the storm showed no signs of breaking. For tonight at least they were on their own. As darkness claimed the world outside, three lost souls shared the warmth of one fire, while the past and future circled like wolves, waiting for weakness, hungry for resolution. Dawn broke hesitantly over the mountain, pale light filtering through frost-covered windows. James hadn't slept. He'd spent the night keeping the fire fed, watching the slow rise and fall of the woman's chest, making sure death didn't steal her while he dozed. The baby had fussed intermittently, hungry cries that twisted something painful in his chest. He'd managed to coax a few spoonfuls of watered-down condensed milk between her tiny lips. Not proper food for an infant, but better than nothing. Now, as morning painted the cabin in shades of gray and gold, the woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened to reveal eyes the color of summer sky. For a moment, confusion clouded them. Then panic. "Clara!" She bolted upright, wild-eyed, hands groping the blankets. "My baby! She's right here," James said quickly, stepping forward with the infant cradled in his arms. Safe and sound. The woman stared at him. A tall figure with an unkempt beard and a baby looking impossibly small against his broad chest. Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the single room with its sparse furnishings. The fireplace, the rough-hewn table with one chair, the narrow bed pushed against the far wall. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice hoarse. "Where am I?" "Name's James Harrington. This is my cabin." He kept his distance, recognizing the fear in her eyes. "Found you collapsed on my doorstep last night. Storm was too bad to fetch help, so I brought you in." Some of the tension left her shoulders, but wariness remained in her posture. "My daughter. Hungry, but otherwise seems fine." He took another careful step forward. "Can't say the same for you. You were half frozen when I found you." The woman pulled the blanket tighter around herself, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Harrington. We won't impose long. If you could point us toward town." "Town's 15 miles through mountain passes." James nodded toward the window, where snow continued to fall. "And that storm isn't finished. You're not going anywhere today." Panic flashed across her face again. "We can't stay. I just need some food for Clara, and we'll be on our way." James sighed, running a hand through his tangled hair. "Look, Miss Morgan. Abigail Morgan. Miss Morgan. I don't know what you're running from, and I don't much care. But that baby needs more than a few spoonfuls of condensed milk, and you look like a strong wind might blow you over. At least wait out the storm." Abigail's gaze dropped to her daughter, and the fight seemed to drain from her. "Clara hasn't eaten properly in days." "My milk." She trailed off, shame coloring her cheeks. "There's a trading post in Pinetree Junction. They might have what she needs." James carefully transferred the baby to her arms. "When the weather breaks, I'll make the trip." Abigail clutched Clara to her chest, breathing in her scent as if to reassure herself that her child was truly safe. "Why would you help us? You don't know me." The question hung in the air between them. James turned away, busying himself with stoking the fire rather than meeting her eyes. "Because once upon a time someone helped me," he said finally. "And because no child deserves to suffer for grown folks' troubles." A tense silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackling fire and the soft sounds of Clara. "I can pay you," Abigail offered quietly, "for the food and shelter. I have a little money." James shook his head. "Keep your money. You'll need it wherever you're heading. California, she whispered almost to herself. My cousin lives in Sacramento. She doesn't know I'm coming. James nodded but said nothing. He'd seen enough desperation to recognize a woman with nowhere else to turn. Are you hungry? He asked instead, moving to the small shelf that served as his pantry. Got beans, jerky, and some cornmeal. Not fancy, but it'll keep body and soul together. Thank you. Abigail adjusted Clara in her arms. Could I? Is there somewhere I could clean up? James pointed to a copper basin in the corner. Can warm some water for you. There's a screen I can put up for privacy. As he set about preparing a simple breakfast, Abigail watched him carefully. This rough mountain man with gentle hands was nothing like the people she'd fled. There was no judgment in his eyes, no questions about her unmarried state or Clara's father. Just quiet efficiency and unexpected kindness. Later, with warm food in her stomach and Clara sleeping peacefully beside her, Abigail studied her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was clean but Spartan. No photographs, no feminine touches, just the necessities and a few books stacked beside the bed. You live here alone? She ventured. James nodded, chewing slowly. 2 years now. It's very. She searched for a polite word. Peaceful. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That's one word for it. What brought you to this mountain, Mr. Harrington? His face closed like a shutter. Same thing that brings most men to places like this. Wanting to be left alone. The rebuke in his tone was gentle but unmistakable. Abigail dropped her gaze to her plate. I'm sorry. I shouldn't pry after you've shown such kindness. James sighed, pushing away from the table. No need for apologies. Just not much for talking. He moved to the window, studying the falling snow. Storm's getting worse. Might be stuck here a few days. Abigail's hands trembled slightly. They might be looking for me by now. Who might? Clara's grandfather, the banker in Clearwater. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He wants to take her from me. Says an unmarried woman can't raise a child properly. James turned, his expression unreadable. And the father? His son. Bitter laughter escaped her lips. Who conveniently left town when my condition became obvious. Understanding dawned in James's eyes. So you ran. Wouldn't you? Abigail challenged, chin lifting. They were going to declare me unfit. Place Clara with a proper family. I'd rather die than let that happen. The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. Outside, the wind howled a mournful tune, and snow piled higher against the cabin walls. No one comes up this mountain in winter, James said finally. Not unless they're lost or desperate. You're safe here until the weather breaks. Relief and gratitude washed over Abigail's face, quickly followed by caution. And then you decide what comes next. He turned back to the window. Sometimes running is the only choice left. I understand that better than most. As Clara stirred and began to fuss, Abigail wondered what ghosts haunted this solitary man. What wounds had driven him to this remote mountainside, where even memories struggled to find purchase in the thin, cold air. And she wondered, with equal parts hope and dread, what new dangers awaited when the snow finally stopped falling and the path back to civilization cleared once more. 3 days passed like whispers in the night. The blizzard showed no signs of mercy, piling snow higher than the cabin's windows and trapping Abigail, Clara, and James inside the small wooden shelter. The howling wind created an odd music, sometimes angry, sometimes almost sad, as if the mountain itself was telling stories only the brave could hear. Each morning, Clara's cries woke them before dawn. Each evening, the fire's dying embers painted shadows across unfamiliar faces growing less strange by the hour. You need more wood, Abigail observed on the 4th morning, watching James stack the last logs beside the hearth. Clara nursed contentedly in her arms, happier now that Abigail's milk had returned with regular meals and rest. James frowned at the dwindling pile. Got a stack under the lean-to out back. Have to dig through the snow to reach it. I can help, Abigail offered quickly. His eyebrows rose in surprise. With the baby? Clara will sleep after feeding. I'm not made of glass, Mr. Harrington. And I don't accept charity without giving something in return. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to it she'd seen. Stubborn woman. Determined, she corrected. An hour later, bundled in James's spare coat that swallowed her slight frame, Abigail stood in the shelter of the cabin's back door. The cold hit her like a slap, stealing her breath despite the woolen scarf wrapped around her face. James moved with surprising grace for such a big man, cutting a path through waist-deep snow toward a small structure half buried in white. "Stay in my tracks," he called over his shoulder. "Snow's deeper than it looks." Abigail followed carefully, sinking even in his footprints. The air sparkled with ice crystals that caught the morning light like scattered diamonds. After days confined inside, the vast whiteness stretching toward distant peaks made her dizzy with its beauty and danger. At the lean-to, James began digging through the snow with a wooden shovel. Abigail stood ready to stack wood in the canvas sling they'd carry back to the cabin. "You married Mr. Harrington?" The question escaped before she could reconsider. 4 days of dancing around personal matters had created a hollow space filled only with small talk and practical concerns. His shoulders stiffened. The rhythmic scrape of shovel against snow paused. "Was?" Abigail waited, but no further explanation came. She tried again. "How long have you lived on this mountain?" 2 years, 3 months. His digging resumed, more forceful than before. "All alone." The shovel struck wood. James began clearing the stack of logs. "People are overrated. Less complicated without them. Even when you need help carrying firewood?" Abigail challenged gently. He handed her the first armful without meeting her eyes. "Managed before you arrived. We'll manage after you've gone." The way he said it, matter-of-fact, without self-pity, made Abigail's heart twist unexpectedly. This man had built walls thicker than his cabins to keep the world at bay. What had happened to drive him so completely from human connection? They worked in silence until the canvas sling was full. As James straightened, something caught his attention beyond the trees. He went still, head cocked like a wary animal. "What is it?" Abigail whispered, suddenly afraid. "Smoke." He pointed toward the valley below. "Coming from the direction of the old mining camp. Shouldn't be anyone down there this time of year." Fear crawled up Abigail's spine. Could it be travelers? Lost in the storm? James shook his head slowly. Maybe. Or could be someone looking for something. Or someone. His eyes met hers, concern evident despite his guarded expression. "Let's get back inside." The return journey felt longer, every shadow between the trees suddenly menacing. James insisted on carrying the wood alone, keeping Abigail close behind him. Inside, with the door firmly barred, he moved immediately to the small window facing the valley, watching the distant smoke with narrowed eyes. "You think they're looking for me?" Abigail said quietly, checking on Clara, who slept peacefully in her makeshift cradle. "Can't be sure." James stepped away from the window, removing his snow-covered coat. "But best not to take chances. Keep away from the windows for now." Fear and guilt collided in Abigail's chest. "I've brought trouble to your door. I should never have." "Stop." His voice was firm but not unkind. "You did what any mother would do to protect her child. I respect that. But now you're involved in my problems. My choice." He hung his coat by the fire to dry. "Besides, probably nothing. Might be trappers or prospectors holed up until the weather breaks." Abigail wasn't convinced, but the warmth of the cabin and James's calm practicality eased her immediate fear. She busied herself preparing a simple stew from their dwindling supplies, grateful for the routine tasks that kept darker thoughts at bay. As evening approached, James returned to the window periodically. The smoke had disappeared with the fading light, but his vigilance remained. "Tell me about Clara's father," he said suddenly, settling in his chair with a mug of coffee. The request startled Abigail, coming from a man who guarded his own past so carefully. She stirred the bubbling pot slowly. "William Prescott, son of Franklin Prescott, owner of Clearwater Bank and half the businesses in town. Bitterness crept into her voice despite her efforts to sound neutral. Handsome, charming, full of promises. And you believed him. I loved him. Abigail's hand trembled slightly. Or thought I did. He spoke of marriage, of building a life together. Then I told him about the baby. James watched her over the rim of his mug. He denied responsibility? Worse, he offered money to take care of the problem. When I refused, he told his father I was trying to trap him. She laughed without humor. Suddenly, I was the scheming seductress and poor William the innocent victim. And the town believed him. Of course they did. The Prescotts own Clearwater. I was just the schoolteacher's daughter, barely making ends meet since Pa died. Abigail wiped her hands on her apron, fighting back the familiar tide of humiliation. When they fired me from the mercantile, I knew what came next. Franklin Prescott sits on the town council. He would have declared me unfit and taken Clara. James's expression darkened. So you ran in the dead of winter with a newborn. Not my wisest decision, Abigail admitted, but the only one I could live with. Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the occasional creak of the cabin settling in the cold. James drained his coffee, then set the mug aside with deliberate care. My wife's name was Eliza, he said quietly, eyes fixed on the flames. Our son was Robert. Abigail went still, sensing the weight of this offering. Eliza died bringing him into this world. James's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the chair's arms. The boy followed 3 months later. Lung fever. I'm so sorry, Abigail whispered. Buried them behind our farm in Colorado. Couldn't bear to stay after. Too many ghosts. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly for perhaps the first time. So I understand running, Miss Morgan. Sometimes it's the only way to keep breathing. The confession hung in the air between them, a bridge across carefully maintained distance. Abigail felt tears prick her eyes, not just for his loss but for the unexpected connection forming in this remote cabin, born of shared pain and unwanted understanding. Clara's soft whimper broke the moment. Abigail moved to the cradle, lifting her daughter with practiced ease. She needs changing, she murmured, grateful for the distraction that allowed her to compose herself. James rose, moving toward his small bookshelf. Got something for you. He selected a worn volume, holding it out awkwardly. Found it when unpacking some old crates yesterday. Thought you might like something to read besides watching me whittle. Abigail shifted Clara to accept the book. A collection of poetry, its spine cracked from frequent use. Inside the cover, a delicate feminine script read, To James, who finds beauty even in the wilderness. All my love, Eliza. I can't take this, she breathed, trying to return it. It's too personal. Just to borrow, he insisted. Books should be read, not hidden away. Eliza would have liked knowing it brought someone comfort. Their fingers brushed as she accepted the precious offering. Something unspoken passed between them, a tentative trust neither had expected to find. Outside, night wrapped the mountain in darkness, hiding whatever dangers might lurk below. Inside, firelight danced across two faces marked by loss yet stubbornly facing forward, united by circumstance and the fragile beginning of friendship neither had sought. Later, with Clara settled and James snoring softly in his chair, having insisted Abigail take the bed, she opened Eliza's book. Among the pages, she found a dried wildflower, a small purple blossom preserved like a memory. Abigail touched it gently, wondering about the woman who had loved poetry and a man who now shunned the world. Tomorrow would bring new worries, the mysterious smoke, dwindling supplies, the inevitable breaking of the storm. But tonight, in this moment of borrowed peace, Abigail allowed herself to imagine a future beyond running. One where Clara might grow up safe, where second chances weren't just fairy tales told to foolish girls with broken hearts. She fell asleep with the book cradled against her chest, dreaming of spring flowers pushing through snow and new paths appearing where only wilderness had been before. Morning light filtered through frost-covered windows, painting patterns across the cabin floor. For once, Clara hadn't woken at dawn. The baby slept peacefully in her cradle, tiny fists curled beside her face. Abigail watched her daughter breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest like precious coins, treasure that couldn't be stolen by bankers or judgmental townsfolk. The cabin door swung open, bringing a blast of cold air in James, his arms loaded with fresh split wood. His breath clouded in the morning chill as he kicked the door shut behind him. "Storm's breaking," he announced, dropping the logs beside the hearth. Snow dusted his beard and shoulders, melting quickly in the cabin's warmth. Skies clearing to the west. The news should have been welcome after days of confinement, but Abigail felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. Clear weather meant decisions could no longer be postponed. Clear weather meant facing whatever or whoever waited in the valley below. "I need to check the smoke we saw yesterday," James continued, brushing snow from his coat. "Make sure it's not trouble heading our way." "I'll come with you," Abigail said quickly. James shook his head. "Too dangerous, and someone needs to stay with Clara. But if it's people looking for me, all the more reason for you to stay hidden." His tone softened at her worried expression. "I'll be careful, just going to look, not engage." Back before midday, Abigail wanted to argue but knew he was right. Clara's safety came first. Still, the thought of James facing potential danger on her behalf sent an unexpected wave of protectiveness through her. "Take your rifle," she insisted. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Plan to." After a hasty breakfast, James prepared to leave. He stood awkwardly by the door, adjusting his hat, seemingly struggling with something unsaid. "If I'm not back by sunset," he finally managed. "There's a loose floorboard under the bed, emergency supplies, money, map to Pine Tree Junction." He couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Just in case." The implication hung heavy between them. Abigail stepped forward impulsively, straightening his scarf. "You'll be back. I'll have dinner waiting." His rough hand briefly covered hers, a fleeting pressure that spoke volumes. Then he was gone, boots crunching through crusted snow as he headed toward the tree line. Alone with Clara, the cabin suddenly felt both smaller and emptier. Abigail moved through her morning tasks mechanically, nursing Clara, tidying the small space, taking inventory of their supplies. Her eyes drifted repeatedly to the window, searching for James's return across the snowy landscape. As she swept the floor, her broom hit something under James's chair, a small wooden object that skittered across the planks. Bending down, Abigail retrieved a half-carved figurine. A woman holding a baby. The details were rough, unfinished, but the tenderness in the carved faces was unmistakable. Her throat tightened. When had he made this? In the quiet hours while she and Clara slept? She returned it carefully to its hiding place, feeling like an intruder in a private moment not meant for her eyes. By midday, with no sign of James, Abigail's worry grew into something sharper. She paced the cabin, checking the window so often that Clara began to fuss in response to her restlessness. "I'm being silly," she told her daughter, bouncing her gently. "Mr. Harrington knows these mountains. He's fine. But what if he wasn't? What if he'd encountered whoever had made that smoke? What if they'd captured him, forced him to reveal her hiding place? Or worse, what if he'd fallen, injured himself where no one could find him?" The afternoon stretched endlessly. Abigail heated water for tea, hoping the ritual would calm her nerves. As she reached for the canister on the shelf, her fingers brushed against something else. A small tin box pushed to the back, nearly hidden behind the flour sack. Curiosity overcame propriety. She pulled it forward, hesitating only briefly before lifting the lid. Inside lay a woman's wedding ring, a lock of dark hair tied with faded ribbon, and a tintype photograph of a young couple. The man was unmistakably James, though younger, clean-shaven, with bright eyes untouched by grief. Beside him stood a pretty woman with a gentle smile, her hand resting on the slight swell of early pregnancy. Eliza, and the child they'd lost. Abigail closed the box quickly, shame burning her cheeks. These weren't her memories to examine. She returned the tin to its hiding place, more aware than ever that she was an intruder in this man's carefully constructed solitude. Outside, the sun began its early winter descent, casting long shadows across untouched snow. Still no James. By the time darkness fell completely, fear had become Abigail's constant companion. She lit the oil lamp, positioning it in the window as a beacon. She fed Clara, changed her, sang softly until the baby drifted to sleep, all while straining to hear footsteps that didn't come. Her hands shook as she recalled James's instructions. The loose floorboard under the bed. Emergency supplies. A contingency she prayed wouldn't be necessary. Just as she was steeling herself to look, a sound froze her in place. The distant crunch of snow under boots. One set of footsteps, then two. James wasn't alone. Heart hammering, Abigail quickly extinguished the lamp. She scooped Clara from the cradle, wrapping her tightly to muffle any cries. With trembling fingers, she pulled up the floorboard James had mentioned, finding a canvas bag containing food, ammunition, money, and, thank God, a small pistol. The footsteps grew closer. Male voices carried through the night air. James's familiar rumble and another, sharper tone she didn't recognize. They weren't arguing, which offered some relief, but Abigail kept the pistol close as she settled Clara in a protected corner, hidden behind the wood box. A knock sounded, 3 quick raps, then 2 slower ones. A signal. Abigail? It's James. I've brought someone. A friend. You're safe. Friend? James didn't have friends. He'd made that abundantly clear. Suspicion warred with hope as she approached the door, pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt. Step back, she called. I'm opening the door, but I'm armed. A soft chuckle came from outside. Smart woman, we're stepping back. Abigail unbarred the door with her free hand, pushing it open just enough to peer through the gap. James stood several paces back, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Beside him was a wiry older man with a silver-streaked beard and the weathered face of someone who lived outdoors. Miss Morgan, James said formally. This is Ezra Blackwood. The smoke we saw was from his camp. He's a trapper. Works these mountains every winter. He paused, something like relief in his voice. And he brings news from Clearwater. News? Abigail's grip tightened on the pistol. What kind of news? The older man stepped forward, removing his hat respectfully. Ma'am, didn't mean to frighten you. I stop in Clearwater every fall before heading to my trapping grounds. Was there 3 weeks back when quite the scandal broke out. Her throat went dry. What scandal? Seems the banker's son, Prescott's boy, got himself in trouble with 3 other girls besides yourself. One of them being the mayor's niece. Ezra's eyes twinkled despite his serious tone. Town turned on him pretty quick after that. Last I heard, his father shipped him east to relatives in Boston. Quite the disgrace. Abigail's legs weakened. She gripped the doorframe for support. And, the search for me? Called off far as I know. Mayor insisted, once the truth came out about that Prescott boy's character. Ezra shrugged. Course, that was weeks ago. Can't say what's happened since. James stepped forward, concern etched on his face. Let's continue this inside. Too cold for Clara to have the door open this long. The mention of her daughter snapped Abigail back to the present. She tucked the pistol into her pocket and stepped aside, allowing both men to enter. The contrast between them was striking. James tall and solidly built, Ezra wiry and compact with the quick movements of a man who'd spent decades outmaneuvering larger predators. The older man's eyes took in the cabin with a single sweep, noting Clara in her corner, the single bed, the feminine touches Abigail had added to James's Spartan home. An amused smile played at his lips, but he kept whatever conclusions he'd drawn to himself. Mr. Blackwood was heading to Pine Tree Junction for supplies, James explained, warming his hands by the fire. Says the main pass should be clear enough for travel by tomorrow. Call me Ezra, please. The trapper settled on a stool Abigail offered. Been working these mountains 30 years. James here saved my hide 2 winters back when I took a bad fall. Figured I owed him a warning when I spotted your tracks heading this way. Warning. Abigail retrieved Clara, needing the comfort of her daughter's weight in her arms. Ezra and James exchanged glances. There's more, James said quietly. Tell her. The trapper leaned forward, elbows on knees. 2 men passed through my camp yesterday. Didn't see me. I keep a hidden shelter away from the main site. They were asking about a woman and baby at the trading post in Pine Tree last week. Described you pretty well. Abigail's blood turned to ice. Prescott's. Don't think so. One called the other Marshall at one point. Ezra scratched his beard thoughtfully. Could be bounty hunters using false authority. Not uncommon these days. Or could be legitimate law enforcement, James added, his expression grave. Either way, they're asking questions about a woman matching your description, and they're headed this direction. The fragile sense of security Abigail had built over the past days crumbled like sand. She clutched Clara tighter, mind racing through limited options. How long do we have? Day, maybe 2, Ezra estimated. They're traveling slow, not familiar with mountain terrain. James moved to the window, peering into the darkness. I've been thinking. There's an old mining cabin about 8 miles west. More of a shack really, but it's hidden in a box canyon. Few people know it exists. You're suggesting we hide there? Abigail asked. He turned, determination hardening his features. I'm suggesting you and Clara hide there. I'll stay here. Tell these men I haven't seen anyone matching your description. Send them back down the mountain. And if they don't believe you? Abigail challenged. If they search the cabin and find evidence we've been here, we'll remove everything that suggests a woman or baby was present, James countered. I've lived alone for years. They'll have no reason to doubt me. Ezra cleared his throat. There's another option. I'm heading to my winter camp after Pine Tree. Deep in the high country. No one goes there. You could come with me at least until spring thaw. The offer hung in the air, a testament to the kindness of strangers that Abigail had nearly forgotten existed after Clearwater's cruelty. But the idea of leaving James, of hiding in some remote trapper's camp through the brutal mountain winter with a baby, filled her with dread. I need to think, she whispered, overwhelmed by the speed with which her world was shifting again. James nodded. Nothing needs deciding tonight. Ezra will stay with us until morning. He glanced at the older man. We should bring your supplies up from your camp. Safer to consolidate. As the men prepared to venture out again, Abigail caught James's arm. Thank you, she said quietly, for not sending us away immediately. Something complicated flickered in his eyes. Told you before, my choice to help. His voice dropped lower, for her ears alone. And I'd make it again. The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. In the days they'd spent together, something had changed between them. A connection neither had sought but both now seemed reluctant to sever. After the men left to retrieve Ezra's gear, Abigail stood in the center of the cabin, Clara sleeping against her shoulder, and faced a truth she'd been avoiding. This place had begun to feel like home. Not just shelter from a storm or a temporary haven, but somewhere she could imagine building a future. But tomorrow would bring strangers asking questions. Tomorrow would force decisions about where she and Clara would go next. The path ahead forked in multiple directions, each fraught with its own dangers. As she prepared a meal for 3 instead of 2, Abigail wondered which scared her more, continuing to run, or the growing wish to stay with a man who might not want the complication of a ready-made family disrupting his carefully constructed solitude. Outside, stars emerged in the clearing sky, cold and distant. The mountains stood silent witness to the human drama unfolding in the small cabin tucked against its vast, indifferent face. And somewhere in the darkness, unknown men sought a woman who had dared to choose her own path. They're coming up the south ridge. Ezra's urgent whisper cut through the morning quiet like a knife. The old trapper had slipped out before dawn to scout the surrounding area, returning with news that turned Abigail's blood to ice. She clutched Clara tighter against her chest, the baby still drowsy from her morning feeding. James immediately moved to the window, carefully peering through a narrow gap in the curtains. His broad shoulders tensed as he spotted the distant figures making their way up the snow-covered trail. How many? He asked, voice low and controlled. 3 men. 2 on horseback, 1 leading a pack mule. Ezra began gathering his few belongings with the efficiency of a man accustomed to quick departures. Matching the description of those asking questions in Pine Tree. One's wearing what looks like a marshal's badge. The cabin suddenly felt impossibly small to Abigail. A trap rather than sanctuary. How much time do we have? An hour. Maybe less. James turned from the window. His expression hardened into calm resolve. Ezra, how far to that mining cabin I mentioned? 4 hours in good conditions. Longer with a woman and baby in this snow. James nodded once, decision made. Then we split up. I'll stay, deal with these men. You take Abigail and Clara to the mining cabin. No! The word burst from Abigail before she could consider its wisdom. Both men turned to her in surprise. I won't have you facing danger alone because of us. These men could be dangerous. What if they don't believe your story? She's right, James, Ezra added, surprising her with his support. If that's a real marshal, lying to him is a serious offense. And if they're bounty hunters masquerading as law, he left the implication hanging. James ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. Then what do you suggest? We can't outrun them with a baby. Silence fell as 3 adults confronted their limited options. Clara stirred against Abigail's shoulder, innocent to the danger approaching with each passing minute. What if we don't run? Abigail said slowly, an idea taking shape. What if we face them directly, but change the story? Both men stared at her, confusion evident on their weathered faces. Explain, James prompted. Abigail took a deep breath. What if, instead of a fugitive mother hiding from the law, they find a family, a husband, wife, and newborn living in a remote cabin? Understanding dawned in James's eyes, quickly followed by doubt. You want us to pretend to be married? Would it really be so difficult to believe? Her chin lifted slightly. A remote cabin, a man and woman of appropriate ages, a baby. Ezra nodded slowly, stroking his silver beard. It could work. No one questions a family in these parts. Plenty of folks seek isolation in the mountains. He glanced between them with shrewd eyes. Question is, can you two be convincing as husband and wife? James and Abigail's eyes met across the small room, a current of unspoken thoughts passing between them. For days they danced around the subtle shift in their relationship, from reluctant host and desperate guest to something neither could yet name. I believe we can, Abigail said quietly. It's our best option. James hesitated, then gave a single, decisive nod. We'll need to work quickly. Ezra should still leave. 3 adults might raise questions where 2 wouldn't. I'll head out the back way, the trapper agreed. If anyone asks, I'm just a friend visiting on my way to my trapping grounds. What about Clara? Abigail worried. Her age won't match any believable marriage timeline. James's expression softened as he looked at the infant. She could be adopted. Orphan niece, perhaps. Plenty of children lose parents in these mountains. The simplicity of the solution struck Abigail with its brilliance. Not a lie, exactly, Clara had effectively lost her father, and Abigail herself had been orphaned when her parents died. James and Abigail Harrington. She tested the names together, feeling strange warmth despite their dire situation. And Clara Harrington, our adopted daughter. Something flickered in James's eyes, pain or possibility. She couldn't tell which. We need evidence of a life together, he said practically, moving to action. Ezra, there's a trunk in the loft with some of Eliza's things. Would you mind? The old trapper climbed the ladder to the small storage space above, returning moments later with a wooden chest that James hadn't opened in years. With gentle reverence, he lifted the lid to reveal carefully folded women's clothing, preserved from another life. She was about your size, James said softly, not meeting Abigail's eyes. If you're willing. Abigail understood the enormity of what he offered. Not just a disguise, but access to the most personal remnants of his previous life. Are you certain? His answer was to lift a simple blue dress from the trunk. Eliza would have wanted them used to protect a child. She was that kind of woman. The next 45 minutes passed in a flurry of activity. Ezra slipped away after extracting promises to meet at the mining cabin if things went poorly. Abigail changed into Eliza's dress, which fit as if made for her, and arranged her hair in a simple style befitting a frontier wife. James reorganized the cabin, bringing out a second plate, moving Abigail's few possessions into open view, creating the impression of a shared life. Most difficult was the matter of sleeping arrangements. The cabin had only one narrow bed, clearly meant for one person. Without discussing it directly, James added a second pillow and widened the bed frame slightly with extra boards stored in the lean-to. As they worked, they hurriedly constructed the details of their fictional marriage, when they'd met 2 years ago in Pine Tree Junction, when they'd married the following spring, how they'd come to adopt Clara. She was the daughter of James's late cousin, orphaned 3 months ago. "We'll keep it simple," James advised, checking the approaching riders through the window again. "The more details we create, the more likely we'll contradict ourselves." 15 minutes, maybe less, he added grimly. Abigail smoothed her borrowed dress with trembling hands. "Will you be able to do this? To speak of Eliza's things as if they've always been mine?" James turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "I buried my wife and son 2 years ago, but I've been holding their ghosts too close. Maybe this is—" He paused, searching for words. "Maybe this is what needs happening." Before Abigail could respond, Clara began to fuss. She lifted the baby, soothing her automatically, while her mind raced with all that remained unsaid. James watched them, something shifting in his gaze. Then, with surprising gentleness, he stepped forward and placed his hand on Clara's tiny head. "Your daughter is beautiful," he said softly. "Our daughter," he corrected, practicing their deception. But the words didn't sound like deception when he spoke them. They sounded like possibility. The distant jingle of bridles and creak of saddle leather announced their visitor's arrival. James moved to Abigail's side, standing closer than he ever had before. His hand found the small of her back, tentative, protective. "Ready, Mrs. Harrington?" he asked, his voice holding a question beyond the immediate charade. Abigail leaned slightly into his solid presence, drawing strength. "Yes, Mr. Harrington. I believe I am." The knock, when it came, seemed to shake the entire cabin. 3 sharp raps that might announce salvation or doom. James squared his shoulders, nodded once to Abigail, and moved to answer the door. Snow dazzled against the morning light as James pulled the door open. 3 men stood on the porch, 2 middle-aged, 1 considerably older. The eldest wore a tarnished star on his coat. "Good morning," James said with carefully measured surprise. "Don't often get visitors this time of year." The marshal stepped forward, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Marshal Thomas Blackburn. These are my deputies, Green and Winters." He gestured to the men behind him. "We're tracking a young woman traveling with an infant, believed to be in these mountains." James frowned convincingly. "Don't see many travelers in winter, Marshal. Just me, my wife, and our little girl." The marshal's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mind if we come in? Been a long, cold ride." James hesitated just long enough to seem natural, then stepped aside. "Of course." Abigail just put coffee on. 3 sets of boots stomped snow onto the cabin floor as the men entered. Abigail forced herself to smile pleasantly, bouncing Clara gently in her arms. "Welcome, gentlemen. Please warm yourselves by the fire." Marshal Blackburn removed his hat respectfully, but his keen eyes missed nothing as they swept the cabin's interior. "Appreciate the hospitality, ma'am. Sorry to disturb your morning." "Not at all," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "We don't get much company up here." The youngest deputy, Green, approached the fire eagerly, rubbing his gloved hands together. "Been tracking this woman for 2 weeks now. Abandoned her newborn's father, stole money from her employer. Real nasty business." Abigail stiffened, but years of hiding her feelings in Clearwater served her well. "How terrible!" she murmured, kissing Clara's forehead to hide her expression. The marshal studied her carefully. Pretty baby. How old? 3 months, James answered smoothly, moving to stand beside Abigail. My cousin's child. They both died of fever back in October. We took her in. That's mighty Christian of you, the marshal commented, his gaze lingering on Clara's face. Not Christian. Family. James's arm slipped around Abigail's waist, a gesture that appeared natural but sent her heart racing. When did you marry, Marshal? The question, personal yet innocent, momentarily threw the lawman off balance. 26 years this spring. Then you understand. James's voice softened convincingly. When you find the right woman, there's nothing you wouldn't do for her and the children you share. Something in the simple statement rang with such truth that even Abigail felt its power. The marshal's stern expression softened marginally. Coffee's ready, she announced, gently extracting herself from James's embrace to pour mugs for their unwelcome guests. As she moved around the cabin, familiar after days of making it her temporary home, Abigail felt the weight of the marshal's gaze following her. She forced herself to move naturally, to meet his eyes when appropriate, to act like a woman with nothing to hide. James kept the conversation flowing, asking about conditions on the trail, discussing the unusually heavy snowfall, revealing just enough about their supposed life together to seem open without inviting deeper questions. Clara, blessedly, remained calm in the presence of strangers, even smiling when the older deputy made silly faces at her. She has her mother's eyes, Marshal Blackburn observed suddenly, watching as Abigail settled the baby in her cradle. Her heart stuttered, but James replied smoothly, her father's, actually. My cousin had the same blue eyes. Family trait. The marshal nodded thoughtfully, finishing his coffee. Well, we've imposed long enough. Thank you for the warmth and refreshment. He stood, signaling his deputies to do the same. If you happen to see a young woman traveling alone with an infant, I'd appreciate knowing about it. Of course, Marshal, James agreed easily. Though I doubt anyone could survive these mountains alone with a baby. The lawman's eyes darkened. That's what concerns us. The woman we're seeking may not understand the danger she's put herself and her child in. As the men prepared to leave, the marshal paused at the door, turning back to survey the cabin one last time. His gaze lingered on the single bed with its 2 pillows, on the woman's shawl draped over a chair, on the intimate signs of a shared life that James and Abigail had so carefully arranged. How long have you two been married? He asked casually. Coming up on 2 years this spring, Abigail answered without hesitation, moving to James's side, their rehearsed story flowing naturally. The marshal nodded, seeming satisfied. Then, with a tip of his hat, he led his deputies back into the snowy morning. James and Abigail stood frozen in the doorway, watching the men mount their horses. Only when the riders disappeared around the bend did they allow themselves to breathe normally again. They're gone, James whispered, closing the door against the cold. For now, Abigail amended. Legs suddenly weak with released tension, she sank into a chair, trembling. Do you think they believed us? James stared at the closed door, his expression troubled. I'm not certain. That marshal's been hunting a long time. He notices things others might miss. The fragile sense of safety they'd constructed threatened to shatter once more. Abigail looked down at the blue dress she wore, Eliza's dress, and felt the weight of borrowed identity. What do we do now? She asked softly. James turned to her, his eyes reflecting the same uncertainty she felt. I don't know, he admitted, but I think our performance bought us some time to decide. Outside, fresh snow began to fall, covering the visitors' tracks as if erasing evidence of the danger that had come so close. Inside, 2 people contemplated a deception that had felt strangely like truth, and a future suddenly more complicated than either had imagined. Silence blanketed the cabin after the marshal's departure, broken only by Clara's occasional coos from her cradle. Abigail remained seated, her borrowed blue dress pulled around her, while James paced the length of the small room, periodically checking the window to ensure their visitors had truly gone. We need to decide, he finally said, turning to face her. They'll continue searching the area. Might even return. Abigail nodded, her mind racing through their limited options. We could still go to the mining cabin. Meet Ezra there as planned. And then what? James challenged gently. Hide indefinitely? That's no life for you or Clara. The honest assessment hung between them. Abigail rose, moving to the cradle where Clara had drifted to sleep, untroubled by the adult's worries. Her daughter's peaceful face, so trusting, so innocent, made the decision both harder and clearer. I could leave, she said quietly, not looking at James. Head south toward Sacramento as originally planned. The marshal would follow my trail away from here. You'd be safe. James stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth behind her. Is that what you want? The question, direct yet layered with meaning, forced Abigail to confront feelings she'd been avoiding since the day she'd awakened in this cabin. Did she want to leave? To return to running? To face the uncertain journey to a cousin who might not welcome them? What I want, she admitted softly, is a home for Clara, safety, belonging. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Things I haven't had since before my father died. And you think you'd find those in Sacramento? I don't know. She turned to face him, finding him closer than expected. But I do know I can't keep risking your safety. You've done enough. More than anyone could have expected from a stranger. James's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through his usual reserve. Is that what we still are? Strangers? The question hung in the air between them, impossible to avoid, dangerous to answer. Before Abigail could respond, a sharp knock at the door startled them both. James immediately pushed Abigail behind him, hand moving toward his rifle. They've returned, he muttered, but the voice that called out wasn't the marshal's. James? It's Ezra. All clear to come in. Relief washed through Abigail as James quickly opened the door. The old trapper hurried inside, bringing a swirl of snowflakes and urgency with him. They've gone down the north trail, Ezra reported, stamping snow from his boots. Heading toward Pine Tree Junction. You followed them? James asked, surprised. Figured we needed to know their movements. Ezra's shrewd eyes moved between James and Abigail, noting their proximity with interest. How'd your performance go? They left, Abigail said simply. Whether they believed us entirely, I'm not certain. Ezra nodded thoughtfully. Marshall seemed like a sharp one, might have suspicions. He settled into a chair, accepting the coffee Abigail quickly offered. Which means we need to decide next steps. Can't stay here if they return with reinforcements. The three adults fell silent, each contemplating the roads ahead. Clara stirred in her cradle, breaking the tension with her innocent demands. Abigail lifted her daughter, the simple act of cradling her child centering her thoughts. I've been thinking, James said slowly, about a more permanent solution. Both Abigail and Ezra looked at him expectantly. The marshal's looking for an unmarried mother with a newborn, not a proper family. James cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. Our deception worked because it was close enough to a believable truth. Abigail's heart quickened, sensing where his thoughts led. What are you suggesting? What if it wasn't a deception? The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back. What if we made it real? Ezra's eyebrows shot up, though a smile tugged at his lips. Well now, he murmured, rising from his chair. Think I'll just check those horses again. Give you two a moment. The door closed behind the trapper, leaving James and Abigail facing each other with nothing but truth between them. James, Abigail began, uncertain what would follow his name. He held up a hand, asking for silence until he found the right words. I'm not doing this well. Never was good with words. He took a deep breath. When Eliza and Robert died, I thought that was the end of family for me. Came to this mountain to be alone with my grief. Abigail waited, Clara quiet in her arms as if sensing the importance of the moment. Then you arrived. You and Clara. His voice grew stronger. And suddenly this cabin wasn't just a place to exist. It became a home again. You barely know me? Abigail whispered, though something inside her responded to his words. I know enough, he countered. I know you're brave enough to flee into a winter storm to protect your child. I know you're kind, even to a man who did his best to be unwelcoming. I know you have strength that most would envy. He stepped closer, tentatively reaching out to touch Clara's cheek. I know I haven't felt this alive in 2 years. Haven't wanted a future until now. Tears threatened at the corners of Abigail's eyes. Are you proposing marriage, James Harrington? Not elegantly, he admitted with a small smile. But yes, a real marriage, not just for protection. One where we could build something together. His expression grew serious again. I'm not asking you to forget William or pretend Clara isn't his. I'm just asking for a chance to be her father in all the ways that matter. Abigail looked down at her daughter, then back at the man before her. Not the dashing figure William had cut in Clearwater, with his fine clothes and easy charm. Instead, a mountain man with calloused hands and a heart wounded but still capable of extraordinary kindness. I can't promise love, she said honestly. Not yet. I'm not asking for promises you can't give. James's voice was gentle. Just a willingness to see what might grow between us. The rest will follow or it won't. The practical nature of his proposal touched Abigail more deeply than flowery declarations might have. This was a man who understood loss, who didn't make promises lightly. What about the marshal? She asked practically. He could still return. As a legally married woman, any claims about stolen wages would be harder to pursue, James reasoned. And Clara would have my name, my protection. Abigail considered his words, weighing security against the enormity of binding her life to this man's. When would this happen? Ezra knows the circuit preacher in Pine Tree Junction. He's there until Sunday. James's practical planning revealed he'd been considering this longer than just today. We could be there and back before any weather turns. The decision crystallized in Abigail's mind with surprising clarity. Not the romantic fantasy she'd once dreamed of as a girl, but something more solid, a foundation upon which to build a life for Clara. Yes, she said simply. I will marry you, James. His exhale suggested he'd been holding his breath awaiting her answer. With careful movements, as if approaching a wild animal that might startle, he stepped forward and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. Thank you, he whispered against her skin. Ezra's timely return interrupted the moment. The trapper took one look at their faces and broke into a wide grin. Well now, looks like we'll be heading to Pine Tree after all. The journey to Pine Tree Junction took most of the next day. James insisted Abigail and Clara ride his only horse while he and Ezra walked alongside, breaking trail through fresh snow. The cold air burned Abigail's lungs, but the brightness of the winter sun and the purpose in their journey kept her spirits high. They arrived as afternoon shadows lengthened across the small settlement. Little more than a trading post, saloon, and handful of cabins clustered in a protected valley. The preacher, a kindly man with spectacles perched on his nose, asked few questions when Ezra explained the situation in carefully edited terms. The Lord works in mysterious ways, he said simply, opening his Bible, bringing people together when they least expect it. The ceremony took place in the trading post's back room, witnessed by Ezra and the postmaster's wife. Abigail wore Eliza's blue dress, now truly hers by James's insistence, and held Clara in one arm while joining hands with James. The words were traditional, their meaning profound despite the humble surroundings. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James hesitated only briefly before placing a chaste kiss on Abigail's lips, their first, over before she could properly register the sensation. Mrs. Harrington, he said formally, though his eyes held warmth that belied his serious expression. Mr. Harrington, she returned, a small smile playing at her lips. Afterward, they purchased supplies with some of the money James had saved. Proper baby clothes for Clara, fabric for new curtains, extra food for the winter ahead. The normalcy of shopping together as husband and wife felt strange yet comforting. As Abigail examined a bolt of calico, she overheard the postmaster's wife whispering to another woman, "Tragic story. His first wife died in childbirth. This new one lost her husband in a mining accident. They found each other through their grief. The women nodded approvingly at the perceived romance. Abigail said nothing to correct them. Let the town believe whatever story made them comfortable. The truth, complex, unconventional, belonged only to those who had lived it. They spent the night at the settlement's small boarding house, James insisting on taking the floor while Abigail and Clara shared the narrow bed. Tomorrow would be soon enough to navigate the intricacies of their new relationship. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold as they began the journey home. Home. The word felt strange in Abigail's mind, yet right somehow. Ezra left them at the trail junction, heading toward his trapping grounds with promises to visit in spring. Take care of each other, the old man advised with a wink. Marriage is like trapping, requires patience, vigilance, and knowing when to let things be. The cabin appeared as they crested the final ridge, smoke curling from the chimney where James had carefully banked the fire before their departure. Snow sparkled in the midday sun, transforming the mountain into a jeweled landscape. James helped Abigail and Clara from the horse, his hands lingering momentarily at her waist. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Inside, the cabin felt different somehow, smaller yet larger, familiar yet changed by their new status. James busied himself with the fire while Abigail settled Clara. "I've been thinking," he said as flames caught the fresh kindling. "Come spring, we should build an addition. Proper bedroom for us. Nursery for Clara." The casual mention of us sent an unexpected warmth through Abigail. "I'd like that. And maybe a garden out back? Root cellar too. Gets hot in summer. We'll need a way to keep food fresh." His plans extended beyond the immediate future, Abigail noted with surprise. He was thinking of years ahead, of seasons changing, of a life built together. "James," she interrupted his practical planning, "are you happy with this decision? Truly?" He turned to her, flames casting his face in golden light. "Happier than I thought possible again." The simple honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. Abigail crossed the room to stand before him, suddenly needing to express what she couldn't quite name. "I don't know if this is love yet," she admitted, "but I feel safe with you, respected, seen. That's more than many marriages begin with," he replied. "And I'm grateful." She took his rough hand in hers. "For Clara's sake, but also for mine." James squeezed her fingers gently. "We'll build this together, day by day." Outside, snow began falling again, gentle flakes that softened the harsh mountain landscape. Inside, a family forged in desperate circumstances took its first tentative steps toward something neither had expected to find. As night fell across the mountain, Clara slept peacefully in her cradle. Abigail and James shared the now properly widened bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance as they adjusted to their new reality. But when Abigail woke in the darkest hours before dawn, she found her hand had sought his in sleep, their fingers intertwined as if even unconscious, they reached for connection. Perhaps, she thought as sleep reclaimed her. This was how love began, not with grand passion or dramatic declaration, but with small moments of reaching out across the darkness, finding safety in another's presence when the world offered none elsewhere. Spring arrived on the mountain like a shy visitor, tentative at first, then bursting with confidence. Snow retreated up the slopes, revealing muddy earth that grew more vibrant with each passing day. The frozen creek behind the cabin broke free of winter's grip, singing a bubbly song that provided constant background music to their days. 3 months had passed since Abigail and James spoke vows in Pine Tree Junction. 3 months of carefully building rhythms together, of learning each other's habits, of transforming 2 separate lives into one shared existence. "She's trying to crawl again," Abigail called from the cabin porch, where Clara squirmed on a quilt spread across the weathered boards. At 6 months old, the baby had developed a determined personality that reminded Abigail of herself. Stubborn, curious, unwilling to accept limitations. James looked up from the garden plot he was turning, leaning on his shovel to watch Clara push herself up on chubby arms. Strong girl, he observed with unmistakable pride. Gets that from her mother. Such comments no longer surprised Abigail. James had slipped into fatherhood with remarkable ease, never once treating Clara as anything but his own. The love between them had blossomed naturally, sweetened by Clara's delight whenever he entered a room. The relationship between Abigail and James had evolved more slowly, built on foundation stones of respect and shared purpose rather than passion. They no longer maintained careful distance in their bed, instead finding comfort in the warmth of another body during the mountain's still chilly nights. Occasional kisses, growing gradually less hesitant, punctuated their days. Not the desperate romance of her youthful dreams, but something steadier, more enduring. I found something while digging, James said, approaching the porch with dirt-stained hands. He held out a small purple flower, the season's first wildflower pushing through the recently thawed ground. Reminded me of you. Abigail accepted the simple gift, twirling it between her fingers. Why does it remind you of me? Stubborn thing, he explained with a gentle smile. Growing where it shouldn't be able to, surviving against the odds. The comparison warmed her more than flowery compliments ever could have. James saw her, truly saw her, in ways William never had. Where Prescott had admired her beauty, James valued her strength. Where William had seen a conquest, James recognized a partner. The addition is coming along well, he commented, nodding toward the half-finished room extending from the cabin's eastern wall. Should be ready before summer's heat. Give us all more space. The word still sent a pleasant shiver through Abigail. After years of facing the world alone, us felt like the most precious gift. Clara's frustrated cry interrupted the moment as her arms gave out, collapsing her onto the quilt. James immediately knelt beside her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her sit up. Patience, little one, he murmured. You'll get there. Watching them together, something shifted in Abigail's heart, a final piece falling into place. This mountain man with his quiet ways and steady hands had become more than a protector or provider. Without grand gestures or poetic declarations, he had become essential to her happiness. Perhaps that was what real love looked like. Not the feverish infatuation she'd felt for William, but this bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The crunch of hooves on the path drew their attention before she could voice these thoughts. James immediately tensed, moving protectively in front of Abigail and Clara. Expecting anyone? She asked, heart quickening with old fears. James shook his head, reaching for the rifle that never strayed far from his side. Stay here with Clara. But as the rider came into view, James relaxed. It's Ezra, he called, setting the rifle aside. The old trapper looked travel-worn but pleased to see them, dismounting with a nimbleness that belied his years. Promised I'd visit come spring, he announced, tipping his hat to Abigail. Brought some pelts for the little one's room. They welcomed him inside the cabin, where James poured coffee while Abigail prepared a meal. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly. How naturally they moved around each other, anticipating needs, sharing space. A real family, formed not by blood but by choice. After dinner, as Clara dozed in her cradle, Ezra shared news from his winter travels. Stopped in Clearwater on my way up, he mentioned casually, though his eyes watched Abigail carefully. Interesting developments there. Her hands stilled in their work. What kind of developments? Seems young Prescott returned from Boston. With a wife. Ezra sipped his coffee, letting the information settle. Banking family from back east. Quite the society match from what folks say. Abigail absorbed this news with surprising detachment. The name that once held power to wound now felt distant, belonging to another life. There's more, Ezra continued. That Marshal Blackburn passed through Clearwater too, asking questions about you. James moved closer to Abigail, his presence steadying. What kind of questions? Seemed particularly interested in your whereabouts. And Clara's. The trapper stroked his beard thoughtfully. Got me thinking, why would a lawman be so persistent about a case involving disputed wages? Unless it wasn't about wages at all. Cold realization dawned. Franklin Prescott, Abigail whispered. He's still trying to find Clara. My guess? He doesn't want his new daughter-in-law knowing his son fathered a child with another woman. Ezra's expression hardened. Man like that, with money and influence? He could make things difficult. James's hand found Abigail's shoulder, steady and reassuring. We're legally married. Clara carries my name now. There's nothing he can do. Unless he claims the marriage wasn't valid, Abigail countered, old fears resurfacing. If he discovers how quickly we wed after I fled. Which is why I brought this. Ezra reached into his coat, withdrawing an official-looking document. Had the preacher backdate your marriage certificate. According to this, you two were wed a month before Clara was born. He winked. Just in case anyone comes asking. James accepted the paper with obvious gratitude. We can't thank you enough. No need for thanks. The old trapper smiled at Clara. Just doing right by my favorite mountain family. That night, after Ezra had retired to the barn loft and Clara slept soundly, Abigail and James stood on the porch beneath a canopy of stars. The spring air carried the scent of pine and possibility. Are you worried? James asked quietly, his arm around her waist. About Prescott? The marshal? Abigail considered the question, searching her heart for the fear that had been her constant companion for so long. To her surprise, she found it diminished, overshadowed by something stronger. No, she replied honestly. Not anymore. James studied her face in the moonlight, appearing to find something that pleased him. You've changed since that snowy night you collapsed on my doorstep. I'm not running anymore, she agreed. Then, gathering courage, she added, because I found what I was really searching for. And what's that? He asked, voice dropping lower. Home? Abigail whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him properly. Not the brief, hesitant touches they'd shared before, but something deeper, truer. A kiss between equals who had chosen each other deliberately. When they parted, James's eyes shone with emotion he rarely voiced. I never expected to find this again, he admitted. After Eliza, I thought that part of me was dead. And now, his hand cupped her cheek with infinite tenderness. Now I know second chances are possible, even for a broken man on a lonely mountain. As they stood wrapped in each other's arms, the distant howl of wolves echoed across the valley, nature's reminder that danger still existed in their world. But inside the circle of James's embrace, Abigail found herself unafraid of what tomorrow might bring. They had built something stronger than fear on this mountainside. Something neither Prescott money nor legal threats could easily tear down. Love, she was discovering, could be as stubborn as a wildflower pushing through frozen ground. Unexpected, resilient, and beautiful precisely because it had overcome so much to bloom. The summer heat of 1886 settled over the mountain like a warm blanket. Wildflowers painted the meadows in brilliant colors, while birds called cheerfully from trees heavy with new growth. Nature had fully awakened from winter's slumber, matching the blossoming of life within the expanded Harrington cabin. Clara took her first unsteady steps on a July afternoon, toddling from Abigail's arms to James's waiting hands, while both parents watched with matching expressions of wonder and pride. Her delighted giggles echoed through the new addition James had completed, a proper bedroom for the adults and a small nursery for Clara, connected to the original cabin by a short hallway. She's going to be running up and down the mountain by fall, James predicted, swinging the squealing child into the air. Abigail leaned against the doorframe, memorizing the scene before her. This gentle giant of a man and the tiny girl who had him wrapped around her finger. Then we'd better finish that fence around the garden. I can't have my two favorite people trampling my vegetables. My two favorite people. The phrase came naturally now, without the hesitation that had marked her early months as James's wife. Somewhere between winter's end and summer's arrival, their marriage of convenience had transformed into something neither had anticipated. A union of genuine love and deepening trust. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's new eastern window, catching the simple gold band James had surprised her with on their 6-month anniversary. "A proper ring for a proper marriage," he'd said gruffly, embarrassed by his own sentiment. The memory brought warmth to Abigail's cheeks. That night had marked another transformation between them, the final barrier falling away as their marriage became complete in every sense. Now, watching James teach Clara a silly game with his fingers, Abigail pressed a hand to her stomach where the earliest signs of new life had begun to make themselves known. She hadn't told him yet, wanting to be certain before sharing news that would surely overwhelm him with emotion. A second chance at fatherhood, a child of his blood to join the daughter of his heart. The clatter of approaching horses interrupted her thoughts, sending James immediately to the window. "Riders coming," he announced, his relaxed demeanor instantly shifting to alertness. 3 of them. Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. Ezra? Not his horse. James reached for his rifle, then paused, peering more intently down the trail. "Wait, I recognized that bay gelding. It's Marshall Blackburn." Cold fear washed through Abigail. She gathered Clara protectively against her chest. After all this time? Why would he return now? "I don't know." James's expression hardened into the mountain man's mask he rarely wore anymore. "But we faced this together. Together." The word steadied her racing pulse. They were no longer a frightened runaway and a reluctant protector. They were family, legally, emotionally, completely. "Let me handle the talking," James advised as the riders drew nearer. "Remember, according to our papers, we've been married since before Clara was born." Abigail nodded, adjusting her dress and smoothing Clara's wild curls. "We have nothing to hide," she reminded herself as much as him. The riders stopped in the yard, dust settling around the horses' hooves. Marshall Blackburn dismounted first, followed by a well-dressed older man Abigail didn't recognize and a younger deputy who remained with the horses. James stepped onto the porch, positioning himself slightly in front of Abigail and Clara. "Marshall," he greeted evenly. "Didn't expect to see you again." Blackburn removed his hat, revealing more gray hair than Abigail remembered. "Mr. Harrington, Mrs. Harrington." His gaze settled briefly on Clara before returning to James. "Sorry to intrude on your family, but I have business that couldn't wait." "What kind of business brings a marshal all the way up this mountain in summer heat?" James asked, maintaining his calm facade though Abigail could sense the tension in his shoulders. The well-dressed stranger stepped forward. "My name is Judge William Hollister, Territorial Circuit Court. I've come regarding the child." Abigail's arms tightened around Clara, who sensed her mother's distress and began to fuss. "What about our daughter?" she demanded, fear giving way to protective anger. The judge's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside, out of this heat?" James hesitated, then nodded curtly. "You can come in. Your deputy stays with the horses." Inside the cabin, the visitors took in the obvious signs of established family life. Clara's wooden toys scattered across the floor, Abigail's quilting frame in the corner, the half-finished cradle James had begun crafting from pine. Small details that told the story of people building a future together. "Coffee?" Abigail offered automatically, hospitality ingrained despite her apprehension. "Thank you, ma'am." The judge accepted while the marshal declined with a slight shake of his head. As Abigail busied herself at the stove, Clara toddling after her, James faced their visitors directly. "You mentioned business regarding our daughter?" Judge Hollister cleared his throat. "Yes, we've received a petition from a Franklin Prescott of Clearwater, claiming rights to the child as her grandfather." Though Abigail had feared this moment for months, the reality of it still struck like a physical blow. She steadied herself against the table, grateful when James moved immediately to her side. "What kind of rights?" James asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Mr. Prescott claims his son is the child's biological father. He seeks custody on grounds that the child was born out of wedlock and that Mrs. Harrington." The judge glanced at his papers. Then Miss Morgan fled with the infant to avoid proper legal proceedings. "That's a lie," Abigail stated flatly, finding strength in James's solid presence. I left because Franklin Prescott threatened to have Clara taken from me simply because I wasn't married. The marshal studied her with the same keen eyes she remembered from winter. Why should he care so much about a grandchild his son denies fathering? Because William Prescott married into Boston banking money this spring, James answered. A scandal involving an illegitimate child would damage valuable connections. Judge Hollister's eyebrows rose slightly. You seem well informed about the Prescott family affairs. News travels, even to mountains. James kept his tone neutral, especially when it involves people threatening my family. Your family? The judge emphasized the word slightly. That's precisely the matter at hand. Mr. Prescott claims you married Mrs. Harrington only after she fled Clearwater with the child, making your adoption of Clara legally questionable. Abigail's stomach clenched, but James remained steady. Our marriage certificate shows otherwise, he stated confidently. We were wed before Clara's birth. The marshal and judge exchanged glances. Yes, we've seen the certificate, Judge Hollister acknowledged. Dated remarkably conveniently. Some might question its authenticity. Are you accusing the Pine Tree Junction preacher of falsifying legal documents? James challenged, an edge entering his voice. The conversation paused as Abigail placed coffee before the judge. Clara, sensing the tension, clung to her mother's skirts, hiding her face from the strangers. The child seems quite attached to you both, the marshal observed, watching Clara with unexpected gentleness. Of course she is, Abigail replied, lifting Clara into her arms. We're her parents, the only parents she's known since birth. Judge Hollister sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Mrs. Harrington, would you permit me to ask you a direct question? Abigail straightened her spine. Yes. Is William Prescott the child's biological father? The cabin fell silent save for the ticking of the clock James had crafted during winter evenings. Abigail met the judge's eyes without flinching. Yes. And did you leave Clearwater with the child without informing him? I left because he had already abandoned us, Abigail replied evenly. He denied responsibility when I told him about the baby, offered money to solve the problem, then fled to Boston when I refused. The judge nodded, making a note on his papers. And now you're married to Mr. Harrington, who has legally adopted Clara as his daughter. Yes, James is her father in every way that matters. The marshal, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke. I've been tracking this case since January. Spent considerable time in Clearwater, speaking with townspeople. His weathered face revealed nothing. Interesting place, Clearwater. Folks there have strong opinions about the Prescott family. James and Abigail exchanged confused glances. What the marshal means, Judge Hollister clarified, is that not everyone in Clearwater supports Franklin Prescott's version of events. Several citizens provided sworn statements regarding his treatment of you, Mrs. Harrington, and his son's abandonment of his responsibilities. Hope flickered cautiously within Abigail. Then why pursue us at all? The law requires thorough investigation of all custody claims, the judge explained, especially those involving influential citizens. He closed his portfolio with a decisive snap. Having conducted said investigation, including this visit to observe the child's living situation, I'm prepared to make my ruling. Clara chose that moment to squirm down from Abigail's arms. To everyone's surprise, she toddled directly to James, raising her arms in the universal child's request to be lifted. Papa, she said clearly, one of her few distinct words. James scooped her up with practiced ease, his large hand cradling her head protectively as she settled against his shoulder. The tableau they presented, mountain man and tiny girl, completely comfortable in their bond, spoke volumes no legal argument could counter. Judge Hollister watched them thoughtfully before addressing Abigail. Mrs. Harrington, do you wish to remain in this marriage and home, with Clara raised as Mr. Harrington's daughter? With all my heart, Abigail answered without hesitation. The judge nodded once. Then I see no legal or moral justification for removing this child from the only home she's known, especially to place her with a grandfather who has demonstrated questionable motives. He rose, gathering his papers. I'll be denying Mr. Prescott's petition for custody and issuing an order prohibiting further legal action regarding Clara Harrington's parentage. Relief crashed through Abigail like a physical wave. She reached for James's free hand, clinging to his strength as the judge continued. The territorial court recognizes James Harrington as Clara's legal father in all matters. Judge Hollister offered a rare smile. Far as the law's concerned, this matter is permanently settled. Marshal Blackburn placed his hat back on his head. I told Prescott months ago he was wasting the court's time. Some men just don't know when they're beaten. As their visitors prepared to leave, the marshal paused on the porch, turning back to James and Abigail. For what it's worth, I never believed you two were married when we first met. A twinkle appeared in his previously stern eyes. But watching you now, well, sometimes the right path finds us by unexpected routes. The riders disappeared down the mountain trail, dust settling in their wake. Abigail and James remained on the porch, Clara dosing against her father's shoulder, as the reality of what had happened slowly sank in. It's over, Abigail whispered. Truly over. James shifted Clara to his other arm, pulling Abigail against his side. No more looking over our shoulders. No more fears about the past catching up. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Just us, our daughter, and whatever future we build together. The future. Time stretched before them. Seasons of planting and harvest, winters by the fire, Clara's growing years. All without the shadow that had hung over them since that first desperate night. James, Abigail said softly, decision crystallizing in this moment of freedom. There's something I need to tell you. He looked down at her, curiosity in his gaze. Clara won't be our only child for long. She took his hand, guiding it to rest against her still flat stomach. By winter, there will be 4 of us in this cabin. James went utterly still, his expression shifting from confusion to wondering disbelief. You're certain? About 2 months along, she confirmed, joy bubbling up as she watched understanding dawn in his eyes. His hand trembled against her middle as the truth sank in. Tears, the first she'd seen from this strong, stoic man, gathered in his eyes. A baby, he whispered. Our baby. A second chance, Abigail agreed, reaching up to brush moisture from his cheek. For both of us. That evening, as summer twilight painted the mountain in golden hues, James added a final piece to the cradle he'd been crafting, carving their family name into the headboard with careful precision. Clara played nearby, babbling happily to her wooden toys, while Abigail prepared their evening meal. The scene was ordinary in its domesticity, remarkable only for the profound contentment it represented. No grand mansion or social standing could have provided the peace they'd found in this simple cabin, building love from the ashes of past hurts. Watching her husband, for he was truly that now in every sense, Abigail marveled at life's unexpected turns. She had arrived on this mountain a desperate fugitive with nothing but her child and dwindling hope. She had found not just shelter, but a love that asked nothing in return except the chance to grow stronger with each passing day. Outside, the mountain stood sentinel as it had for countless generations, indifferent to human struggles yet somehow benevolent in its steadfast presence. Inside, a family forged through adversity prepared to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Together, unafraid, and finally, completely home.